All right, continuing with assignment 3, our creaturescape. Remember that we are using this assignment as an excuse to perfect our landscape and our creature design. But the first element we need is a very cleanly cut out creature design. And what that means is once you're happy with it, which means every element is as finished as every other element, within the reasonable time we have, right? You want to merge them all together. So this is an important step. I just want to review it, make sure you're comfortable with it, because it really helps in some of the work we'll be doing. So you can see I have 2 red layers here at the top. And the first is the clone stamp layer, which on its own was used to help fill in a lot of gaps and transitions. Help it work. You see I have the backgrounds turned off, but to make sure I didn't have any floating debris around it, I filled the background with gray so I could see anything that was either darker than middle gray or lighter than middle gray that I hadn't erased. You can see the tooth there really nicely. And then I filled it with white so I can see anything that was middle gray. And I have it all nicely erased out. And once I do, I close or I turn off both of those layers. And I go all the way to the top onto my clone stamp layer, and I'm going to merge all of these varied layers together. Something like 30 layers I used. Not quite so many elements, but many different layers. And I do that by holding down Option and going to Layer, Merge Visible. And what that does is it gives me a complete copy on one layer right here. I just created layer 28. And everything is on that one layer. And that allows me to treat it all the same. To adjust its colors, to adjust its levels, you know, just to really help bring it all together. Now I had done that already, and I just brightened it up a little bit. I could also use this to dodge and burn it in certain areas. But I think this one works pretty well. So then I saved it. So I'm not going to save it here. And I saved it as a PSD file, which is what I've opened. And then I also saved it as a PNG file. And that's what this is. Now the PNG is what we submitted for assignment 2. But what you'll notice is that it has no background. So PNG supports transparency, even though it's an online format and it's a compression format, it supports transparency. So this is kind of your backup. If you can't pull this combined layer from your Photoshop file in order to bring into your landscape, you can use your finished PNG. Now my advice is to work on this and to get it to this stage before you really start assignment 3 in earnest. So make the corrections you need here and then bring this layer over into your assignment 1 PSD file, which is again your largest, highest resolution working file format that has all these different layers. And then when you bring it in, you're going to save that with a new name. And I'm going to call it Creaturescape Assignment 3. So this is, I did that, and this is my saved PSD Creaturescape file. So notice it's not the same. I didn't overwrite Assignment 1. In fact, in putting the creature in, I decided that I was a little too heavy-handed with Assignment 1 in terms of the landscape and the texture fills. So I knocked them back quite a bit here, and I might put them back a little, like so. But for now, I have my creature in there. But this is the beauty of this assignment at this point. Once you decide what looks best, so So I'm going to darken this a little. It's foreground cloud. Yeah, that works well. So once I decide that my creature looks better in this landscape, then I can just turn my creature layer off, and I might have an improved landscape as well. And then I can resubmit it. So we're really working to improve all aspects, our creature design, our landscape design, through the avenue of trying to integrate that creature into this landscape. Now, why do we need to have a good cutout creature that's all flattened? Why can't you just use all the pieces? Well, it's like if I look up a fully rendered character online. The ones that are most usable are the ones that are on a flat background with no shadow behind them. Right, so I'm going to choose this one. It's over 6 megabytes or megapixels in size. It's a video game render, so it's a 3D model. And I'm going to save that onto my desktop. And I'm going to show you how you can integrate a character. Okay? So, now I have a character that is not my own, just to demonstrate some of the techniques, and then I'll do those same techniques on my own character. But sometimes it can be easier to see it here when the character is so obviously different from my setting. But what does this character have before I brought him in? He is very clearly defined, right? His shape, his edges, everything is nicely cut out. There's no debris. So I can look at him and say, okay, that's where his feet are. How can I make his feet fit in with my environment? Where do I want to set him? And I might decide, well, I want to set him. Let me turn off these texture fills. Maybe I want to set him in a way that his shape is really complementing the landscape. So right now, his big gun sword here is overlapping with my elephant rock. So that's a little distracting. I can have him overlap it, but that takes a big part of the landscape away. So what I might do is transform him, Command T, and then flip him so he's facing the other way. And a good character design should look good facing either direction. Shouldn't really matter. And then he's going to complement the setting pretty well if I set him right there. And now I have a place for his foot. See how that foot lines up nicely with the terrain there? And then this foot, I don't want it to be on top of this rock. Rather, I want this rock to be on top of his foot. So what did I do? I went back to my landscape, and I found the layer that rock is on, which is this layer. I selected around it, roughly, and then duplicated it with Command J onto its own layer. And then I played with levels adjustments to work with it. But the reason I did that is then I can take this layer and I can move my character behind it. So the first way of integrating your character is through something really simple. It's just called relative perspective. That things that are in front and overlap the things that are behind. And it's good to have things overlap a little bit. So this rock is now overlapping his foot. He is overlapping this rock, so he's clearly in front of this rock. His shield is overlapping this landscape, so he's clearly in front. So that puts him squarely in this zone. The other thing we want to look at, before we get into all the subtleties, is the lighting, right? So what is the lighting of the scene? Well, if I look at these rocks in particular, light's coming from this side, and it's kind of spilling through this canyon. So it's also hitting the rock on this side and then up here. So there's lots of different light sources. But I have these long shadows, which are fairly dramatic in the foreground. Where is light hitting him? Well, it's also hitting him from this side, which when he was flipped, didn't quite match, right? So flipping him was a good idea for that reason as well. But if light's hitting him from this side, he is going to cast a shadow, and he's going to cast a shadow onto this rock and beyond it. So before I deal with coloring or atmosphere or anything like that, let's just get the lighting down. So first we get placement, now we do lighting. So to do that, I need to rasterize his layer. And what I'm going to do is first make a shadow of him. This is a nice little technique. I could just paint a shadow using the burn tool, but I like this technique. I make a duplicate of my guy. Then I go to levels on the duplicate, image adjustment levels, and I make him a black silhouette. By pushing my levels all the way to the right at the top and all the way to the left at the bottom. So now he's a black silhouette, and that's a duplicate layer on top of my original layer. That black silhouette now, I can transform, and I can transform in a variety of ways. But I need it to connect with him at his feet. So to make it a long shadow, I'm going to use the perspective. And I'm just going to tweak it a bit at the top. Sadly, perspective is a very, very picky tool. Let me start over. Transform, right-click within the transform box, say perspective. And then just very subtly, I'm going to bring the top together. So it feels like his shadow is lengthening a little bit. Okay, then I'm going to use more transform tools, just for a different purpose. I'm going to use distort. And I'm going to start to bring that shadow onto the landscape. Remember, his feet need to connect with the shadow still. And if I need to turn off this rock while I'm doing it, just to see how those feet connect, that's fine. That rock's just another layer. So using distort, I have pretty good control. It reminds me of the Disney Peter Pan cartoon where he has to sew his shadow on, and how it's just like a peeled black cutout of the character. Okay, so obviously the shadow is pulling from his feet. And when Peter Pan connected his shadow, he did it by sewing it onto his shoes. Having Wendy sew it onto his shoes. And the shield there is making the biggest shape. And my job is just make sure that the feet connect with the shadow. So something like that. Okay, now I need to soften that shadow, because shadows aren't just black cutouts. But I don't need to soften it really evenly. So what I tend to do is I'll soften the whole thing a little bit, especially in an environment like this, by using a filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and just blurring the pixels a little bit. And I'm looking around the feet in particular. And then I can move that shadow behind my character. See? To make sure it's showing under the feet, even if I'm not seeing that. And I can keep using distort to make sure that that's the case. Like so. Okay. Now, the way shadows work